Remember when 2008 was considered to be the final battle? And then it wasn't? Pepperidge Farm remembers. You don't even watch Family Guy! Shut up, me! Where was I going with this? Oh yeah, 2009. People really don't care for this year, don't they? If they aren't indifferent, they seem to hate it. I usually don't hear a lot of good things about 2009, and I'm honestly not completely sure why. Well, I do know at least one reason why people don't like 2009, but we'll get to that later. For the first time since 2001, we traveled to a completely new planet. If there's one benefit to this brand new planet, it was new possibilities. This wasn't a place with Toa, Matoran, Rahi, and Makuta. This is a place with Glatorian, Ogori, Skrull, and Vorox, where fighting in the arena is how arguments and debates are settled as the various villages just try to survive. Now this isn't something Bionicle has done before, and I actually find Bara Magna and its society pretty interesting. The story serials really help with this one as well, fleshing out the story and the world of Bara Magna even more. I kinda wish Bionicle lasted longer so we could learn more about this place. There are also a lot of the elements of the story I liked. The first half gave a great feeling of despair as the Skrull went battle after battle against the Glatorian and destroyed the city of Atiro. You want to see our hero succeed and defeat the Skrull once and for all. I also like some of the characters. Gresh is the young noble warrior, but seeing him fail and succeed against the Skrull throughout the main storyline does allow people to understand and feel his plight. Tumo and Malum, despite the villain's tendencies, do have enough layers and nuance to them to make them interesting, whether it's Tuma trying to keep his people thriving, and Malum's connection to the monstrous Vorox. I think my favorite character from 2009 though is Madanui. This is the first time we get to see Madanui as an actual character rather than just Robot Jesus. He's lost everything and knows very little about this new land. He practically needs to learn how to fight and even rely on others. It's kind of the familiar fish out of water story, but I like seeing him as an actual living being and seeing him become a better person in the process, especially after seeing his fleshed out backstory in the following year. With that being said, when thinking about it, I think there was a missed opportunity. Since both we and Madanui are new to Spirits Magna, I'd argue that Madanui should have landed on Bara Magna at the beginning of the year. Think back to 2001. The Toa of Mana arrived on the island of Madanui with no memories and knowing nothing about the island. Both we and the Toa are learning more about the world and universe as if our eyes are connected. Think of Toa as our player avatar. For those who grew up in 2001, this could be a magical experience. Bara Magna is a brand new location, much different than anything in the previous years, so we could have seen and learned more about it through Madanui's eyes, almost making it full circle, just like 2001. But instead, we kinda learn about the world twice. The sets at the very least were pretty nice. The trend of using the Nika builds continued, and it was already a pretty great system, so I really didn't mind. Heck, with sets like Skrull and Strack, they even tried to experiment with the bodies a bit. When looking back at the sets again, I noticed how colorful they were. The previous year, 2008, had an awful lot of black, silver, and gray. Less so here, as the colors in the 2009 sets just seem to pop out with the elemental feel each tribe has. There are still duller colors like the Vorox's tan and the Skrull's black, but they are still visually distinctive and have strong secondary colors that help them stand out. Now we get to the elephant in the room, Bionicle: The Legend Reborn. This is considered by many to be the weakest of Bionicle films, and despite this being a guilty pleasure of mine, I can see where the fans are coming from. Despite much better animation when compared to the original films, the story and tone weren't as good as the previous movies, going for something a bit simpler and lighthearted compared to the more complex stories and darker tone. The music was also lacking, especially when compared to Nathan First's amazing score from the original trilogy. I still get some enjoyment out of the film, but it's really not that great. At the very least, it's probably the only time I can say that Worf and Winnie the Pooh work together to fight the forces of evil. Don't worry, I'm used to getting weird looks. I think The Legend Reborn kinda ruined the fans' view on 2009, at least for some of them, especially since it was the first Bionicle film in 4 years and was one of the last things people got to experience from that year. While I agree it didn't help, I don't think it should take away from the good 2009 had to offer. Not the best year, but I would argue it's still worthy of the Bionicle name. So, 2001 wasn't my first introduction to Bionicle. I think the number 10 entry proved that enough. So, what was? If you guys watched the My History Bionicle video I put out almost a year ago, shameless plug, you may remember that my first true experience with Bionicle was at the end of 2002 with my first set, Kopaka Nuva, on my 6th birthday. While I didn't become a fan of the series until 2003, I bought the Tonua and a few of the Bahrag before I got any of the 2003 sets, so I would say I still have a pretty good connection to this year. But enough about that. I should probably get into what I liked about this year. First, the story. It's actually pretty darn dark. That's not to say that 2001 didn't have its dark moments, such as Makuta and the affected masks, but 2002 raises that level. It's not just taking over the island. The new villains, the Bahrag, want to destroy everything. Or as it's described,
it must be cleaned.
That's actually scarier to me, because at least if the island was taken over, there would probably still be some natural resources. Not here. What makes it scarier is the Krana. Not only do these control the Bahrag, but they can also control other living beings. While yes, Tahoe and Lewa were briefly affected by the infected mass from the previous year, as well as Zarahi, the Krana managed to control almost everyone in Lake Koro. Yeesh! That goes above and beyond, seeing the Bahrag and their queens as a terrifying force that must be stopped. The one thing that does hold the story back for me is that it's another scavenger hunt for mask-like objects. There are technically enough differences between the Konoe and the Krana, such as the Toa needing to collect them from their enemies rather than out in the open, there being 48 different Krana when compared to the 36 Konoe, 42 if you count the golden masks, and heck, even the type of material they're made of. But it's still treading some familiar ground. Hey, if I yelled at 2016 for copying 2015, I can criticize 2002 for copying 2001. But I would argue that 2002 has the edge with enough differences between its previous year. And at least this hunt is more interesting than 2016 with actual conflicts. Outside the Bahrag and Bahrag, we didn't see that many significant new characters, but we did get to see the Toa continue to develop in a few ways as we watched them deal with this new threat. Arguably, the most interesting Toa this year was Lewa, as he was infected with the Krana. Even after he is freed by Onua and a few other Matoran, the experience changed Lewa for the rest of the series, making him a little less carefree and even haunting him on several occasions. Finally, we have the sets, which I have to say were pretty good for the time, and for me at least, had some of the best played features in the series. The Bahrag and Toa in particular were standouts to me. The former had the strange alien feel to them that made it feel like they didn't belong, even in the strange world of Bionicle, what with their robotic insectoid-like design and the mask-like brains. Their head-lunging function, while simple, was honestly pretty fun to mess around with, especially with knocking the mask off the Toa. I will say that the fact that you can form the Bahrag into a ball and hang them inside the canisters like they were hibernating was a pretty nice touch. But for me, the best sets were the Toa. Now these were the iconic sets of the series to me. While they have pretty much the same builds as the Toa, their new masks, weapons, and silver armor just made them a lot cooler and more interesting. But my favorite part was that their weapons could double as transportation, whether it was Tahu's swords becoming a lava surfboard, or Kopaka's blades becoming ice skates/skis. These just added a lot more playability to these sets. Heck, even the 2015 Toa called back to these functions. If I had first experienced 2002 earlier and not just in the last month of the year, I probably would have gotten into it more and loved it even more. But still, I enjoyed the parts of 2002 I did get into, and for what it did for the series, I can definitely appreciate it. It's considered to be one of the best years of Bionicle for a reason, after all. So, now is the part of the show where we start dipping our feet into what I would like to call the emo years. While many people consider 2006 the year where Bionicle became much darker and mature, I think 2005 was a bit of a stepping stone towards that. I mean, our main heroes from the previous year get mutated into monsters. That's already an interesting first step. That's horror movie material there, and hopefully not one of the bad ones. That's not to say that the previous years didn't have dark moments as I brought with 2002, but this is where it really became noticeable. But going darker means jack all if there's nothing of substance behind it. And for the most part, I would say it did. I think the situation brings up many more interesting story possibilities than most people give credit for. The setting is our hero's ruined home, a desolate wasteland overrun with monstrous Visorak. The goal is not only to save the rest of the Matoran, but also find a cure for their new Hordika forms. The main characters also need to keep their Hordika sides at bay lest they turn into wild beasts. This setup is a goldmine for further character development and storylines, and that's most obvious with Wakama and Matau, who I would argue go through the most development, which is most obviously seen in the movie. Wakama wants to prove he's a worthy leader, but things keep going up against him. Matau wants to get back to his normal form arguably more than anyone else, making him desperate and even spiteful at points, which is quite different than the Chipper Toei he was the prior year. Speaking of the characters, I really like the villains this year introduced. The Vizirac, similar to the Bahrag, managed to strike fear that wasn't just "I'ma kill you!" While being killed is scary enough, the Venom's ability to mutate, when you think about it, is much scarier. Their victims are left as frightening monstrosities and often succumb to their Hordika side. Losing your mind and becoming a beast, someone you're not, could be argued to be a fate worse than death. Of course, a cure can be found thanks to the MacGuffin of the week, Kitongu, but just the idea behind the Vizirac chills my bones. Thank goodness I don't have arachnophobia, else I probably wouldn't have bought any of their toys. I haven't even mentioned the people who lead these spiders. Hordika is clearly the most famous of these two, and no, it's not just because she's more explorable to Rule 34. I ain't touching that crap. No, what people really like about Hordika is her conniving personality and goals. She cares very little for others, save for Makuta, and she's quite the manipulator too. She managed to convince Sidorak she was loyal and actually willing to marry him, and won for Kama to the dark side temporarily, showing off how dangerous going forward Hordika can be. The femme fatale is quite a common trope, but outside of maybe Lariska, Hordika is the only character in the Bionicle universe who fits that role, so in terms of villains, that's a nice change of pace. I do think Sidorak doesn't get enough credit. Again, like Hordika, he's a different type of villain in the Bionicle series, being a king who's not the most qualified, which ironically is a role he plays well. And when next to Hordika, he's actually quite a good foil, especially seen in the movie. I guess I should finally get to the sets. This is the first year we started seeing a shift away from function and more towards posability. Similar to the turn towards the dark side as I brought up earlier, 2006 was the year they went all in, but 2005 was his planting of the seeds. Robotic seeds, I guess. How would that even work? Would you have to sprinkle oil on them rather than water? Anyway, there was a surprising lack of gears this year. Loto Hordika had their one big arm, Sidorak had both of them, and Hordika and Kitongu had their weapons. There were other functions like the Roduga spinners and the Vizirac's pincers, but there was a larger focus on giving the sets more posability. While the debate of function versus posability still lingers to this day, I actually don't mind the shift personally. And this is a personal list after all. As someone who does stop motion on his YouTube channel, more posability makes for much better animation than the moving gears in the previous years. And this year in Sidorak's case, kinda made the arms flop around. But okay, how are the sets themselves? Still pretty good as usual. I'm not gonna call these the pinnacle of LEGO set design, but it was nice to see a few new builds and some new pieces come around. I do have to give credit to the designs of the Toho Hordika. There's still hints of the old Toho in the designs, especially the heads, but they look off, almost alien. And I mean this in a good way. It's easy to tell that something's not right, and just showing that visually without saying anything is a good indication of a strong design. Even the larger right arm, which, while a bit silly, still manages to convey this feeling. The Vizirac managed to look cool and distinctive while keeping their intimidation factor, and the Titansets were visually interesting as well. That being said though, I think the longer legs for Sidorak and Hordika make them a bit more difficult to keep them standing up. This was also the first year to introduce large building sets that were built with regular LEGO bricks. This is the only time I mention these because honestly, I was never a fan of these and only got one of these types of sets in 2007. Moving on, I feel like I should briefly mention the movie, Web of Shadows. When I was younger, this was actually my favorite out of the original three, but looking at it now, it's gone down lower for me. I'll get into that later, but I feel like the last movie, Legends of Metro Nui, did a respectable job on focusing on each Toa. Bakan was obviously the main character, but we saw each of the Toa develop and get to know their personalities. Not so much here. I guess since these heroes were developed in the previous movie, it would be difficult to develop them more. But number one, that's what you're supposed to do in a sequel, and number two, that's what the books were able to do. I know a series of books has more time to tell a story when compared to a film, but it's so disappointing to see the Toa who aren't for Kama, Matao, and maybe Nakama kinda shoved aside and barely getting any character. Seriously, you could probably switch the dialogue around for these guys and not much would change. This also applies to the Rahaga. Again, unless you're red, blue, or green, you don't really contribute to anything, are just there because, well, we need to sell more toys, alright? Heck, Pooks and Koolets don't even have voice actors! That is sad. I will give credit in some areas. I do like Hordika and Sidorak's characters, the atmosphere, tone, and music were all spot on, the voice acting was fairly decent, with Kathleen Barr's Hordika being a highlight for me, and I did have some fun watching the final battle. But as a film, I do think Web of Shadows was a step back from the last movie. 2005 isn't often ranked among the greats at G1, and it does have its flaws. But then again, what doesn't have flaws? But for what it did right, I quite enjoyed 2005. And now we come to the last of the 3 years in the so-called Golden Age. And people are probably getting angry at me again that this isn't any higher. I'll be back. I'm going to check to see if I locked the door to my bunker. Like 2002, 2003 was a big nostalgia year that made me a fan of the Bionicle franchise. This was also the year that really showed Bionicle's growth as a franchise. We had the first Bionicle movie, which we'll get to eventually, and a Bionicle video game. Okay, we technically had Bionicle games before, but this was literally called Bionicle the Game. I just wish it was a good game. Anyway, what's the plot? Actually, for the first and only time in this franchise, we had 2 different story arcs that don't have that much of a connection between one another. The first was the Toa fighting against the Bahrag Threat, keeping them from freeing the Bahrag, and the second was searching for the 7th Toa and trying to defeat Makuta once and for all. At least, until, we found out he wasn't destroyed. One of the main themes in this year's story was the Toa Nuva becoming arrogant thanks to their new powers and having to relearn their unity. Since they already learned about unity in 2001, this could have easily become repetitive. But I do think 2003 was able to make this different enough. While 2001's lesson in unity came from the Toa's limited knowledge and first meeting one another, 2003's lesson came from pride. If anything, this felt like further development for our heroes. However, what I do find repetitious is the search for the Konoe Nuva. Like with 2016 copying 2015, it felt too much like 2003 was copying 2001. Now, to be fair, this wasn't a big aspect of the storyline, and it did come with some nice character moments and short stories, as shown with Bionicle Chronicles number 4. But then again, it was also pointless. Yes, there was a previously mentioned character moments, but the masks themselves didn't add anything to the overall plot of stopping the Bahrag Threat. It was just another thing to collect, both for the Toa and reward children. They could have easily put all that development into the rest of the story, which they did. Again, collecting the Konoe Nuva wasn't that big of an aspect plot-wise, but it's one of my biggest issues with 2003. Now to me, the second story arc was what made 2003 great. The Toa of Light arc, with Jalo and Takua needing to find a 7th Toa while escaping this wrath of Makuta's sons, the Rockshi. I'm tempted to make a joke about who's the mother, but I want that to spawn any creepy fan art. Hey, I see you there! Don't you dare! This is really where the story was at for me. While the Toa were still prominent figures in this arc, this was really Takua and Jalo's story. The only time the Matoran had gotten the spotlight was outside the main storyline, such as with the games. But it's actually refreshing to see this new point of view in the main storyline and see these characters develop. And hey, this was the first time I actually got to see Makuta. Not just as a shadowy Matoran-like figure, oh no! Like the powerful titan you expect him to look like. And frankly, that's the best voice.
The earth shudders, my brother. The 7th Toa has begun its approach.
Ooh, I can listen to his voice for hours, making my personal ASMR. I do have a few issues with this arc, but we'll get to that and the characters when I talk about the movie, and I do have a lot to talk about with that one. Right now though, I want to briefly bring out the Bahrag Threat. As foes, they were certainly fearsome, giving off a dangerous first impression by stealing Nuva cubes, robbing the Toa Nuva of their powers. They also had abilities that we weren't used to in the Bionicle series at this point, such as gravity and plasma. Throughout their many battles with the Toa Nuva, you could tell these guys were a threat. As characters though, they were pretty much the same to me. Cruel and powerful. Not much else to them. It would be one thing if they were just a faceless horde like the Bahrag were in the year prior, but since these guys could talk and showed somewhat of a personality, it was kind of disappointing to see little of any variation of characterization between any of them. I should probably talk about the sets now, and continuing from things I didn't like about the Bahrag Threat, I'm not a big fan of their toys. Now to be fair, they do look cool, and if the Bahrag never came out, I think I would like these more. But they are such a lazy copy and paste of the Bahrag, I can't really defend it. Compare them to the Toa Mata and the Toa Nuva. Yes, the Nuva had pretty much the same build, but there was a lot of new pieces too, such as weapons, masks, and armor. May I also remind you of the glory of Lava Sword surfboards? What new stuff did we get with the Cal? Just recolors, prints, and weapons. That's it. Do you see the issue here? At least the Nuva had more stuff to show off to cover up how much they copied from the Mata. Bahrag Threat, not so much. Other than that, I do like the rest of the sets. The Matoran got a much needed upgrade from how they looked in 2001, the Rockshi were pretty cool and even a bit creepy, and the larger sets were, in my opinion, one of the best groups of Titan sets in Bionicle's history. Of course, getting Makuta was a big factor in why this group is so good, but there was so much variation between these Titans, from the flapping Gakko bird to the mechanical Yusanui. And Takanuva himself? Oh boy. If LEGO wanted to show he was special enough to warrant a search for him, they nailed it with his design. Finally, we have the movie to cover, Mask of Light. This was a big thing for Bionicle, showing that the series had become something special, something more for LEGO, and we ate it up when it first came out. But yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it had a lot of issues. Now I will give credit where it's due. The tone and atmosphere, marvelous. It sets the mood for this epic storyline, and Nathan First's score is just the icing on the cake. No! I also think the voice acting is pretty well done, with the actors and actresses fitting pretty well into their roles. Except for Onua.
Porto! Look around you. Mining has never been better.
The heck did I do to you? They also did pretty well with the characterization, with all the characters feeling like how they were in the original storyline, with the exception of Onua, who lacks the quiet and wise grace the original had, and Takua. Remember how Takua was prior? A heroic Matoran whose tasks were well known throughout Manui. Not here! In the movie, he's treated more like the adventurous troublemaker who doesn't even want to be part of this adventure. Yeesh. I'm not saying that there aren't aspects of the original Takua here, like his adventurous spirit, but this Takua seems too different from his original counterpart, and it feels like he's only like this so he can be given an arc. Now, if you put your previous knowledge of the Bionicle story aside, this isn't so bad, but since this is a movie arguably more for the fans than anyone else, this inconsistency really hurts the movie for me. There are also a few other issues, such as some of the texturing not being that good, especially with the Roxy's Crata, which takes what should be creepy and making it actually kinda goofy. Also, while I don't think this is the movie's fault rather than LEGO's, but some of the stuff in the ending feels a bit disconnected from the story that came after it. Since LEGO usually has its themes last for about 3 years, it's believed that 2003 was supposed to harken the end of the series, but since Bionicle remained so popular, they continued it. I'm not sure how true this is, it's mostly just a theory. It's good for us fans, but not so good for the ending of 2003. For example, the way Makuta talks in this movie is as if he's trying to protect Manui, as if there are potential consequences for awakening the Great Spirit. But later stories show he doesn't have these feelings and he just wants to take over Manui's body. And the characters talk about awakening Manui this day. Oh yes, but you're about 5 years too late. I know I ragged on 2003 quite a bit, and I know some of you might be wondering why I even bothered putting it this high. First, things I do like, I think outshines the bad for me. Second, I have many good memories of this year, as it's the year where I really started to become a fan. And third, I enjoyed the finality this year had. Again, had. If this was supposed to be the year to end things off, I'd say LEGO tried their darndest to make it a good one. I just don't think it's as good as other people say, that's all.